I never told anyone this. Not my sister, not my therapist, not Melissa, who has been my best friend for 15 years and who knows almost all my secrets. This one stayed hidden in a place I didn't even know existed inside me, in a dark corner I avoided visiting because every time I got too close I felt that old pain squeezing my chest in a way I can't quite describe to anyone who has never felt it. But today I need to talk. I'm not sure why today. Maybe because I can finally speak without falling apart. Maybe because I think there's someone reading this right now who needs to hear that they are not alone. Maybe because carrying something too long weighs on you and I have carried too much weight in my life. My name is Ashley. I'm 32 years old. And for almost my entire life, I felt ashamed of existing in the size that I am. It didn't happen all at once. It accumulated. It was the 4th grade teacher who said in front of the whole class that I needed to stop eating junk food. It was the boy in 6th grade who called me Shamu in the hallway and everyone laughed and I pretended I didn't hear. It was the cousin at the Christmas dinner who said, "Wow, Ashley, you've grown," in that tone that wasn't a compliment and everyone knew it and no one said anything. It was the boyfriend who lasted 8 months and who one day, during a fight, threw in my face that he had never really found me attractive. It was every fitting room mirror, every airplane seat, every group photo where I was the first to say delete that, every time someone looked at me on the street in a way that made me want to disappear. When you spend your whole life receiving the message that your body is a problem, you start to believe it. And worse than believing it, you start to live as if it were true. You stop taking up space. You stop raising your voice. You stop wanting beautiful things for yourself because deep down a part of you thinks you don't deserve them. I stopped buying clothes I liked. I bought what fit, what hid, what didn't draw attention. Black, gray, dark blue. Nothing that said I'm here, look at me. 'Cause the last thing I wanted was for anyone to look. Ashley was 32 years old and had already given up on dreaming about certain things. It wasn't the dramatic kind of giving up, it wasn't a decision made in a single moment. It was that silent surrender that happens gradually, like water slipping through your fingers without you noticing. She simply stopped walking into certain stores, stopped looking at window displays, stopped imagining how she would look in that skirt, that dress, that blouse everyone wore and that she pretended not to want. But the truth was something else. The truth she kept inside her chest, in a place no one had access to. The truth was that she did want. She wanted very much. She wanted to feel beautiful the same way any other woman wants to. She wanted to walk into a store and leave with a bag in her hand without having gone through the humiliation of being told they didn't have her size. She wanted to look in the mirror and not feel that sting in her stomach, that cruel voice that seemed to live inside her and that repeated every time that she didn't deserve it. Ashley weighed 313 pounds when all of that happened. And she knew the exact number because every morning the scale was the first thing to say good morning to her. Not with kindness. With brutality. She grew up being the fat girl in the class. That was the identity the world had built for her before she was even old enough to defend herself. At school, the nicknames were cruel. She pretended it didn't hurt. She learned early to laugh along because laughing was easier than crying in front of everyone and then having to endure the embarrassment on top of the embarrassment. But she would get home, close her bedroom door, lie down on the bed and cry in that silent way of someone who has practiced so much they don't even sob anymore. Her mother said it was a phase. Her father said it was in her bones. Her grandmother said a full belly makes a happy heart. Nobody ever asked how she was really doing. And she kept learning that what she felt didn't have much space in the world. In adolescence, parties were a chapter of their own. Ashley went because not going would mean admitting she was struggling, and she didn't want to admit anything to anyone. But she always stayed on the edge. Always on the edge. Watching the other girls dance, being asked to dance, laughing with the lightness of people who aren't carrying anything heavy. Ashley carried everything. Her body, other people's stares, the jokes that pretended to be compliments, the unsolicited advice about dieting, about exercise, about willpower, as if she simply hadn't wanted to be different until now out of pure laziness. 20, she tried a diet. Then another. Then another one after that. Each one came with a promise and left taking a little of the hope she still had. She deprived herself of things she loved. She went hungry in a way that hurts differently from ordinary hunger. That hunger that isn't just of the body, it's of the soul. It's the exhaustion of punishing yourself without seeing results. She lost weight a few times, gained it back, lost it again, gained even more. And each cycle left a scar that didn't show in the mirror but that she could feel. Work was another battlefield. Ashley was competent, everyone knew that. But promotions went to other people. Opportunities to represent the company at events went to other people. Once, a colleague named Rachel said, without meaning harm or perhaps meaning it very much, that the company needed a more presentable image at those gatherings. Ashley swallowed it, went to the bathroom, spent 2 minutes staring at the mirror, unable to recognize herself, came back to her desk, worked the rest of the day without speaking to anyone. She had a friend, Melissa, who was one of those people who stays by your side even when the whole world turns its back. Melissa never made jokes, never gave unsolicited advice, never looked at Ashley as though she were a problem to be solved. She simply stayed. And that, sometimes, was the only thing that kept Ashley from completely falling apart. It was Melissa who convinced her to go to the party. It was a big event. A work colleague named Courtney, someone Ashley wasn't particularly close to, had invited the entire department. Ashley didn't want to go. She invented 3 different excuses over 3 different days. Melissa patiently and gently dismantled each one, and in the end said something that stayed in Ashley's head for days. You don't need to go for everyone to see you, you need to go so you can see yourself. Ashley didn't quite understand at the time, but she went. In the week before the party, she did something she hadn't done in years. She walked into a clothing store with the genuine intention of buying something beautiful. Not just anything. Something she truly liked. She passed through racks that didn't carry her size. She heard a sales associate say, in that voice of someone who thinks they're being helpful, that the plus-size stock was in the back, as if it were a separate place, a place where people like her should be kept away from the regular clothes. Ashley felt her stomach tighten. But she didn't leave. In the back of the store, among pieces that had clearly been chosen without any aesthetic consideration, she found a dress. Dark green, fabric that fell nicely, a cut she never would have chosen from a distance, but that when she held it against her body, something inside her recognized it. She entered the fitting room carrying that familiar weight of someone who expects disappointment. And when she put the dress on and looked in the mirror, something she didn't expect happened. She looked beautiful. Not in spite of her body. With her body. The dress held her honestly, without trying to hide anything, and she was genuinely beautiful. She cried in the fitting room. In that unashamed way, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and that mixes sadness with relief, that carries the weight of everything that came before alongside the tiny possibility that maybe it was still possible to feel something different. She bought the dress. On the day of the party, Melissa came to her house and helped with her hair. They did it slowly, joyfully, with that energy of a woman caring for another woman without judgment. When Ashley looked in the mirror before leaving, she stood still for a moment. She wasn't the perfect woman from the magazines. She never would be, and she had already made her peace with that. But she was herself. A version of herself that was present, that was there, that had decided to show up. They arrived at the party. And that was when it happened. Ashley heard. It wasn't hard to hear, because people who laugh at someone rarely bother to lower their voices. A group near the entrance, people she recognized by sight, people who had moved in the same circles as her for years. They laughed. They commented. One voice said, "Well, that takes some nerve." Another said that cruel thing people say when they want to hurt but want to seem like they're just telling the truth. Ashley stopped. For a second, the entire world stopped with her. And then she made a choice. A choice that was small on the outside and enormous on the inside. She didn't leave. She didn't lower her head. She didn't go to the corner. She kept walking. In the dark green dress, with the hair Melissa had arranged with such care, with the body that had carried 32 years of pain and strength and everything no one ever saw. She walked through the entire party. She greeted people, talked, laughed at jokes that were genuinely funny, ate what she wanted without apologizing to anyone with her eyes. She danced to one song, just one, but she danced. And at some point during the night, the group that had laughed came back into her field of vision. And they were silent. It wasn't a silence of regret, she knew that. The world doesn't work that way. Cruel people rarely have a sudden moral awakening. It was a silence because she had kept on existing. Because she hadn't disappeared. Because she had stayed and taken up space and been herself without asking permission, and that, for some reason, stripped away the power of their cruelty. On the way home, Ashley and Melissa were quiet for a while. Then Melissa asked how she was doing. And Ashley thought before answering. Really thought. She said she was tired. But that it was a different kind of tired. Not the exhaustion of enduring, but the exhaustion of someone who had used real strength. In the months that followed, Ashley began making different choices. Not because anyone told her to. Not out of obligation. But because something had shifted that night, a small thread she had held onto and refused to let go. She began to move in a way that wasn't punishment, it was care. She began to eat paying attention to what her body was asking for, not what guilt was commanding. She began to buy clothes she liked, clothes with color, with shape, without waiting to reach a different size before deserving to dress well. It wasn't easy. There were relapses in thinking, those days when the cruel voice came back louder than usual. There were days when the mirror was an enemy again. But she had something she hadn't had before. She had the memory of that night. She had the memory of having walked through the entire party in the green dress, of having stayed when everything inside her wanted to flee, of having looked forward when it would have been easier to look at the floor. Ashley's healing didn't come from a scale. It didn't come from a number, didn't come from a smaller pair of jeans, didn't come from anyone's approving gaze. Came on the day she realized she had stopped apologizing for existing. Came slowly, the way everything real does. Came with stumbles and new beginnings, and with Melissa's hand when she needed it. And it came with a dark green dress that still hung in her closet, not as a reminder of suffering, but as proof that in one of the hardest moments of her life, she chose to stay.